Now, a Melbourne doctor is facing possible punishment after refusing to refer a couple for an abortion because they had made it clear that they didn't want to have a girl. Dr Mark Hobart admits that he's broken the law by refusing to provide this referral to a patient on moral grounds, his moral grounds. He could be suspended or even potentially deregistered. 2 years ago, Dr Hobart stood as a candidate for the anti-abortion Democratic Labor Party at a Victorian by-election. Some obstetricians are now proposing that there should be a ban on parents knowing the sex of unborn babies until it is too late for a termination to prevent abortions based on gender. Christian Kerr, what's your take on this? Some might argue that if parents have the right to decide whether to have a child or not, it's reasonable for them to also decide if they want a boy or a girl.
Look, it's an incredibly difficult decision. I mean, particularly, so many couples, I just know through going through the experience myself, sometimes one person wants to know the sex of the child, another person in the relationship might not want to. You've got all these incredibly complicated dynamics, let alone before you actually get onto that whole area of termination. It's just one of those incredibly awkward moral dilemmas, and I think it's something really worth discussing. I mean, how do we feel about this? We've seen some of those terrible consequences of China's one-child policy, where you've got, for various cultural reasons, families preferring to have boys and aborting girls. I mean, it seems to be an issue in so many different places around the world, this whole issue of people preferring sons to daughters and aborting daughters. I think it's something that we really need to have quite a strong discussion about.
Kate, on this, the cultural issue is often cited, as genetic issues. There's more likely to be a deformity in a boy child or a girl child, and therefore there is some selection process there. But what if we were to turn it around and say, OK, this isn't about whether to have an abortion, or where it's a matter of aborting a female child, for instance, but if the parents were to say, well, we're planning on having an abortion, we want a referral for an abortion, but if it's a boy, we will maybe keep it instead if you're saving a life.
I have to tell you, this is so frustrating. This is such a beat-up. This is the first time I heard that Dr Mark Hobart actually ran for the Democratic Labor Party. I have to say, News Limited did not report that on Sunday. News Limited reported John Madigan from the Democratic Labor Party suggesting that all the more reason to support his bill in the Senate, which will remove Medicare funding for gender selection for abortions. John Madigan, when asked by Jonathan Green on the ABC, said yes, he will take this further, and if that goes in, yes, he absolutely has every intention of going further on abortion law reform. John Madigan could be one of these people who are in the balance of power after the next election. In the same article that News Limited ran, there were other people quoted, the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, who said that no, this never happens, and if any doctor was asked, there is no way they would do that. So we've got one doctor from the Democratic Labor Party, I think it's outrageous, frankly, who has got front page news. News Limited has completely fallen for it. Now we're discussing it on the drum. So it's not an issue, and all of the other professionals who were asked all said it's not an issue. And
yet it's been identified as an issue in the United Kingdom, for instance,
yes,
with
but
some
not
Southeast
here.
Asian communities.
Yes.
There hasn't been, to my knowledge, polling of it here, but why would we be, as a multicultural society, why would we be any different to the UK?
Well, I do feel like that we're just falling into the trap that John Madigan and his mates at the Democratic Labor Party have tried to actually pitch this as it's a red herring. It's actually not an issue. It's one doctor who ran as a candidate and is anti-abortion for the Democratic Labor Party, is now kind of starting this narrative that we have couples here in Australia who are asking to abort based on gender. He's quoted one couple. Every other doctor quoted in the News Limited story said we're never asked, and nobody would actually do that if they were asked. And if it happened once, it's completely, out of the ordinary.
So you're saying that there isn't enough apparent demand for the procedure to warrant even discussing it on a sort of ethical or hypothetical level?
Because I know his intentions, and his intentions are ultimately to restrict women's right to choose. His intention is for the Democratic Labor Party to get this through in the Senate, just on this, stir up hysteria in the community, and then slowly slowly wind back gains and continue to push for different abortion law reform and restrict women's access to abortion. That's his ultimate goal.
Is this Peter deliberately taking the argument a step too far, sort of going from gay marriage to polyamorous relationships or marrying goats or whatever it might be, to make it something that is clearly ridiculous, that it isn't happening, as Kate says?
Well, I had the same impulse when I read that. It was one situation and then to find it was being pushed by political activists. I think the last person that wants this debate running is actually Tony Abbott, who's from that DLP position or tradition, who's worked really hard to put this particular issue in a bottle. But, you know, this is the way that politics works. You create the moral panic and you run off the back of it. I can't see this having much of a shelf life.
All right then.